Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Inside View. I am your host, Teddy Panos, coming to you here from the Inside Lowell Studios in beautiful, historic downtown Lowell, and very excited today to be welcoming a special guest onto the Inside View with me. I'd say probably no disrespect to those who've already joined me, but the biggest named guest here. Going to introduce you to her in a quick second and hear from her. I think you're going to want to hear from her. Just want to welcome everybody again for joining us, and I want to thank our sponsors here at Inside Lowell for making the Inside View possible. Of course, our friends at Washington Savings Bank. I actually went there. I got to show off my mug. Went there on Friday and opened up an Inside Lowell account and got treated like a king. I got a coffee mug and an umbrella, which I really needed, those small umbrellas. So thank you to our friends at the Washington Savings Bank, but found out about how easy they are to work with and the great services and products they offer for small businesses. They even have this cool thing that we're going to tell you about in the coming weeks and months here on Inside Lowell called Second Chance Checking. For those who run into some financial difficulties and maybe having a hard time to get cooperation with banks, well, Second Chance Checking. You want to check it out online, Washington Savings Bank. Thanks again to our friends at Hafner's. Great time of year for them, of course. All their energy services, oil, gas, and their car washes. Great Christmas gift idea, by the way. Sign somebody up to be a member of the Hafner's car wash club there, and you can save yourself an awful lot of money. Keep your car clean and rust-free during these harsh winter driving months. And of course, thank you as well to our friends at Reverie 73, a cannabis dispensary located on Bridge Street in Lowell. They're opening two more locations in the spring and summer of 2023, one in Gloucester, one in Beverly. Reverie 73, to listen, explain, inspire, and delight. Thank you to Washington Savings, Hafner's, and Reverie 73 for helping make this broadcast possible. Thank you to all of our sponsors for helping make Inside Lowell possible. And thank you to United States Congresswoman Lori Trahan for joining us here in the Inside Lowell studios. Congresswoman, welcome. It really is an honor to have you here in the studios with us.
Thank you, Teddy. It's great to be here. And I love your new digs. This is, I'm so happy to be on the show.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here, because I know it's a busy time. We were joking off the air that you haven't even finished your Christmas shopping yet. A United States Congresswoman has to do her own Christmas shopping. This is terrible.
Yes. No, well, look, it's a part of job number one, which is being a good mom. But it is, I do wait till the last minute, unfortunately, now more than I did in the past. But it's not just busy because of the holiday season, but we're trying to wrap up our session in Washington. And good news with the omnibus passing this week through the Senate and through the House and signed by the president. So our government will operate well into the new year.
Yeah, and you had a little news for us this morning. Yeah. In that omnibus is some money for some projects, very important projects here in Lowell as well. Tell us a little bit about them, if you would.
Absolutely. So we passed our appropriations, back in the summer through the House, and it did include some really important community project funding. One, Colley Stadium, $3 million investment there, $3 million for community teamwork so that they can help with homelessness and getting people back on their feet through housing. A little over $2 million for the Boys and Girls Club, as well as money, I think it's $500,000 for the Center for Hope and Healing. And so, we every year when we go through our appropriations process, we reach out to our outside groups, folks who are, they need, they're having a shortfall or they need another form of investment, and we prioritize ones that really will be impactful to the communities. And so this looks like it's going to pass the Senate and the House and be signed into law, which is great for these projects.
Certainly is, and you use the word prioritize. Well, nice little segue to the kind of the first question I had for you. Congratulations on your resounding re-election victory. Means you get to get sworn in again in January and start now your third term.
Yes,
correct, as a Congresswoman. What are your priorities going into this the next 2 years here?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So one, we're so happy with the outcome of the election. It's not lost on all of us or any of us who are, working in public service, especially in the office, our congressional office, that, we have to reapply for this job every 2 years. So we were really happy with the outcome, and also the achievements of this last Congress. I mean, the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to be game changing for our communities. Over the course of the next 5 years, our infrastructure will be transformed and really put us in a strong position. Going into the future and other investments that we want from, the private sector. Certainly, the CHIPS and Science Act is going to be a huge boon for Massachusetts because we already have that infrastructure. I was just at a semiconductor supplier down in Marlborough, and making sure that we bring those jobs and that manufacturing back to the United States is critical. So I have to say the Inflation Reduction Act, which makes record investments in clean energy and jobs, which Massachusetts once again is poised to benefit from because of our leadership in those clean energy, in that clean energy transition. And so I think in large part, some of what we're going to have to do is to defend those investments, make sure that they do get appropriated, make sure that, we're lowering prescription drugs for our seniors. We're giving Medicare the ability to negotiate those drug prices so people are able to afford their medications. But then also, whenever you're in a Congress like this, which is split, and it's like nearly split down the middle, it is an opportunity to work together. I've been lucky in that I've been able to focus on building relationships my first 4 years. I've had a lot of success with working with Republicans on mental health and substance use disorder, opioid addiction, CSOs, right? What we talk about the Merrimack River. I introduced the Stop Sewage Overflow bill with Darren LaHood from Peoria, Illinois, and we ushered that into the bipartisan infrastructure bill. When we came into Congress, that was funded zero by the federal government, and now it's $55 billion. So that is important work that we were able to work on together. Certainly, big tech is another area where we didn't get some of the things that we wanted done at the end of this year. Some around antitrust, some around transparency and protecting our kids online. But I do think that there's an opportunity in the next Congress to work on those issues.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, working in the Congress. You've worked in a divided Congress before. The last, your first session was a Republican-controlled Senate, but the Democrats had come back and taken the House. So you've worked under a Democratic speaker. It's flipped. Now Democrats control the Senate. However, you're now going to work under a Republican speaker, assuming the boys can start playing nice and pick one to get the 218 votes. But does that change the way you're going to approach your job? You're by some nature, to get priorities that you have passed, you're going to have to probably get a couple of Republicans to work along with you, aren't you?
No question. The committee that I sit on is the Energy and Commerce Committee. That's now going to be chaired by Kathy McMorris Rogers. And in the last 2 years since I've been on that committee, I've been able to build relationships on that committee. And look, I've worked with some of the most conservative members of the Republican conference on the MATE bill, for example, which gives doctors the tools and the training to treat and diagnose addiction. And, I think sometimes what you have to do when you're on a committee that has such a huge responsibility and such a huge breadth of issue areas that it covers, you have to find the folks where you can work on issues and find common ground. And I've been successful in doing that. And so I think that positions me well for this next Congress, because I'm not going to be meeting people I'm not having my first conversations with Republicans just because they're in the majority. In fact, in many respects, we've already had discussions about what we hopefully can achieve in the 118th, because we didn't get them done in this last Congress. So, I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to be exhaustive and, just look for opportunities to meet the needs of the people here in the district. And that is, that is kind of what binds us, Teddy. I mean, like when you think of 435 members who come to work each day, so many of the issues that I hear about, whether it's in Lowell or Air or Pepperell or Dracut, they're the same issues that Republicans are hearing about too. And so while we might disagree on, some of the prescriptions, it always starts the conversation with, we have to address this. And so that's a good starting point.
Energy and heating. Your constituents are worried about winter energy costs. We're somewhat worried about the winter energy supply if we get hit with a bad cold spell.
Yeah.
This is something across the country, and if they're not worried about winter cold, they're worried about extreme summer heat. You talked about how you may differ, though, with some of the folks across the aisle on what is causing it and how to fix it. How do you address a potential energy shortage when we're moving away from fossil fuels? And some people say that is the reason we're moving away too quickly before the newer renewable energy sources are able to meet the energy demands. How do you strike that happy medium with a wing of your party that wants to say, let's eliminate all of it and sooner, not just 2050, versus folks who are drill, baby, drill?
It's a great question. And you have to have a balance because we can't run out of energy, right? We're actually living under that threat right now. We're seeing Europe that's very much grappling with that very short-term threat. So, first and foremost, there's no family that should have to worry about whether they can put food on the table or pay their energy bill, whether that's electricity or gas bill. One of the reasons why we passed the huge increase in LIHEAP, home heating assistance, is so that people would have a place to go to get, the relief that they need this winter. We know it's going to be a tough winter. I've been really pushing on the administration to release our reserves here in New England and frankly, build up those reserves so that we have more barrels in reserve so that we can release, that into the supply and drive down those costs for families. And so there's no question that this winter is going to be a tough one, and we have to do everything that we can to get folks through it. I think what it does is it really strengthens my resolve in accelerating the transition. And I think you can do both, right? I mean, right now we have to meet the energy needs with the supplies that we have today. But in the meantime, we can also accelerate the transition so that we are not victim to this volatility in the oil and gas market, whether that's dependency on oil oligarchs like, Putin and the Saudis, or just the volatility that we have seen in generation after generation in these markets. And so I think moving toward cleaner energy, alternative forms of energy will help relieve and give stability to families who don't want to see, their prices go up and down depending on supply.
Should part of that strategy be to increase American oil and gas production until such point that we can meet it with wind and solar or whatever, just so we're not dependent on Putin, whatever's happening in the Middle East, which is always a powder keg potentially? Should we kind of try to accelerate some of our own production for now?
Yeah, well, and I think the administration has been pretty straightforward about, they have the most, our oil and gas companies, they've got the highest number of permits than they've ever had. Sometimes when you hear sort of the rhetoric going back and forth, amongst Democrats and Republicans, we get lost in sort of the facts, which is oil and gas companies have, the highest number of permits to drill than they've ever had. We've produced more. And so, we've had hearings in the Energy and Commerce Committee. I've been pretty critical of some of our oil executives because we know that they're pocketing billions of record profits right now in Q1 and Q2 of this year. And we've seen this across industries, especially industries where it's consolidated to, a few major players around keeping those supplies artificially low so that they can charge more at the pump or at the grocery store or at the lumber yard, you name it. But we have seen that coming out of COVID, where we've had, some inflationary pressure caused by COVID-19 or by supply chain. But these big corporations are also using it to wring out more profits. And so I think we have to hold them accountable because good old fashioned greed does exist. But we also need to make sure that we are producing at a rate that is, making sure our families can afford their energy that they've always relied on. But I think first and foremost, and the reason why the Inflation Reduction Act is such an important piece of legislation is because not only is it going to help us achieve our goals, to preserve our planet and make sure we are living on a healthy planet, but it's also going to decrease this cost pressure over time by, just creating alternative sources of energy.
There are some who contend the Inflation Reduction Act actually did the opposite. It accelerated inflation, and we saw inflation up as high as 9%. It's now, I think, somewhere in the lower eights, but it is as high as it's been since the early 1980s. Yeah. Is there a possibility that the act backfired, that the legislation backfired and actually helped drive prices up? If not, how soon can people expect to see relief? They're not paying $3 a head for a lettuce or...
Yeah, look, and look, I know from growing up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck that we could have never, withstood a 20% increase in any one of our bills, right? So literally, this is the thing that I'm most focused on is how are we going to drive those prices down? One of the things the Inflation Reduction Act did do was tackle prescription drug prices, right? And so there are some prices that we can readily impact, and then there are some, that are more market driven. And so I think focusing on the ones that we can impact and bring down for families is exactly what we need to do. And we've done that with some of the infrastructure dollars going to supply chain, opening up our ports, making sure that goods are flowing seamlessly across the country, an important step, making sure that we're decreasing the prices of medication, like capping insulin finally at $35, such an important step, making sure that we've seen the price at the pump come down significantly since, earlier this fall. And so we have to just be doing everything possible. There's no question right now that one of the big things that's driving inflation, since COVID, is this reality that we don't make anything in the United States anymore. I hear that all the time from companies. Some of the costs, some of their inputs, whether it's a small business or an Intel, everything has been. We're so reliant on a foreign supply chain, and whether it's our competitiveness in the 21st century, our national security, our ability to protect our public health, we have to bring those jobs back, and we have to bring manufacturing back to the United States, which is a big part of what the CHIPS and Science Act and the infrastructure bill do. So I'm excited about those investments.
Yeah. You talked about the drug prices. There's also I was listening this morning to the news. There's a shortage of cold medicines, or I know, and I also had heard a stat from a well-known Llewellyn, George Bacrakis, who was in the pharmaceutical industry, that like 95% of the world's ibuprofen is made in China. We got to start bringing some of that stuff here. Conversely, every industry I know is struggling to get people to actually go to work. And I think that's a big contributor to the shortages as well. I see it in the food service industry, but banks are shutting down branches because they can't get enough tellers. I mean, these were great entry-level starter jobs. Every industry, and at the height of the COVID pandemic, Moderna was advertising they were short on staff as well. How do we get people back to work here in America to start producing the goods we need for day-to-day life, but also to kind of help build this economy, transition folks off assistance and back into the workforce?
Yeah, no, this is without a doubt the biggest thing I hear about day in and day out, from like I said, our smallest of small businesses to our big corporations, that are driving job creation across the Commonwealth. And I think there's a few things that are at play at the moment. One, you mentioned tellers, and I was recently talking to a bank executive who said, look, you go into a bank branch, and predominantly, women have been in those positions, in those teller positions. We had millions of women leave the workforce during COVID. They have not returned at the numbers we need for them. And there's a few things, right? Some are cutting costs because in their own household and, making do with less because they can't make the math work because childcare is just so expensive. And so, we really do need to solve that problem. This isn't just an issue that affects women, although disproportionately it does, but any working household is grappling with the cost of childcare, and that does prevent people from coming back to work. Look, we have to stop using immigration as a political football, and we have to get to the table. One of the things that I'm really hopeful And I think I've mentioned this to you on past interviews, but I sit with the bipartisan working group. We're just an informal group that gets breakfast, every Tuesday morning, 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats. And we talk about immigration all the time. And if we could get rid of like this, rhetoric around, the wall or open borders, like all this stuff that like doesn't make sense. But really what we need to do, of course, secure a border, but passing, the DREAM Act, right? So that people who have, lived in our communities are Americans by all standards except for a piece of paper, can have the assurance that they can build a life in this country. I mean, look, we're in Lowell right now. I mean, your family, my family, they came from other countries and they have contributed mightily, not just to this community, but to our economy. And we're going to need immigrants if we're going to not just meet the needs of right now, but all the investments that we're going to be putting in our infrastructure, our semiconductor industry, our clean energy movement, we're going to need, immigrants to help that as well. And so we have a lot of work to do on workforce, but, Massachusetts has taken the lead so much. I look at what this governor and what the future governor is talking about in terms of vocational and technical programs, community colleges, making sure that those community assets are turning out, workers that are, have the tools they need for this economy. I think we have an opportunity to lead and show the country how it's done.
You're watching the Inside View with Teddy Panos. I'm Teddy Panos, joined in studio by Congresswoman Lori Trahan, her first visit. We certainly hope it won't be the last. We can get you back here,
Absolutely.
Right? All right.
You've been so nice so far.
So far. No, give me time. I still have about 10 minutes to get mean. But I want to thank our sponsors, Washington Savings Bank. Of course, check them out online. They've got some great products, great services. You open a commercial account, you get this really good Washington Savings Bank mug and an umbrella. At least I got it. Maybe I'm just special. Thank you as well to our friends at Hafner's. It Kicks, They Kick. They got our friend Danielle McFadden from the Greater Lowell Chamber of Commerce and fellow insider. They got her set up when she ran out of home heating oil and then had some issues. They were there fast and got her situation solved. And of course, they have all sorts of great energy products. And thank you as well to our friends at Reverie 73, a cannabis dispensary. They're at 1148 Bridge Street in Lowell, right on the Dracut border, basically. But they're opening 2 new shops in the spring and summer of 2023, Essex Avenue in Gloucester and Rantoul Street in Beverly. Reverie 73, to listen, explain, inspire, and delight. You mentioned the MATE Act, Congresswoman, and that's something that's finally close to passing. It deals with addiction, and I would imagine to some degree mental health, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
It's close to passing after 4 years. Yeah. I've looked at it as best I could. There doesn't seem to be anything controversial in it. There doesn't seem to be anything that would tick off the most extreme liberal or the most extreme conservative. It seems so common sense and so easy, and yet here you are after 4 years, and technically it's still not passed, right?
Right.
Why does it take so long to get even the most common sense legislation passed in the halls of Washington, D.C.?
So it's, if I walked you through sort of the rigorous process that it took for us to draft MATE, to us passing it, not just through committee, but also the House. It is. It's a master class on why it takes so long. And I'll tell you, sometimes it's not a Democrat versus Republican thing. Sometimes it's outside groups weighing in on, mandates that legislation would impose. So, for us, I'll tell you, right after getting sworn in, I met Dr. Jim Baker, who I talk about all the time because he was a physician who lost his son to an opioid overdose. And he had all the tools and network to help. But in a conversation with his primary care physician, he realized he did not have the tools to help his son, get on the right track, get the treatment he needed. And so it begged the question, how do these docs who have the ability to prescribe these powerful and addictive medicines not also have the ability to treat, diagnose, identify substance use disorder in their offices? And so that's what we set out to do, to give doctors the tools. So, you can't heal someone if you're not having the conversation, and you're not having the conversation if you don't feel equipped to help. And so that's what MATE does. It allows doctors, just when they're renewing their DEA prescriber's license, to get this one time, 6 hours of training so that they can get the stigma out of the room. The last place where we want stigma to live is between a patient and a doctor. But you better believe that there were a lot of folks who had something to say on how that training gets administered, who has to do it. Some states have very low bars for training while others have high. And then whenever the federal government, pokes its nose under the tent, it can be precedent setting, right? And so I think the groups weighed in on all of that. But it ended well. We passed it through committee. We passed it through the House. It looks like it's going to be in the omnibus as part of a much larger mental health package, which we so need right now. I mean, our kids are going through it, whether it's substance use disorder, suicide ideation, just anxiety, you name it. We need to be funding programs to get our young people the help that they need. So
And the mental health thing can tie it into, as you mentioned, addiction. Homelessness, it rears its head in pretty much every facet. Governor Charlie Baker, outgoing Governor Charlie Baker, you issued a statement when he got appointed president of the NCAA, or they said he was going to take over in March. You issued a statement that I'm not sure his own press secretary could have written something as glowing about. Why did this excite you so much that a Republican governor from Massachusetts was going to head a sports agency that oversees college athletics?
Well, one, I've had the opportunity to work with Governor Baker on a whole bunch of issues. I mean, first and foremost, right when I got into the office, the Merrimack Valley gas explosions had happened. And then during the COVID pandemic, I got to see the way he operates. And he is a thoughtful, very deliberative person who brings stakeholders to the table. Sometimes people don't sort of think about sports and the governance of sports as being political, but it has been. We have legislation that I've introduced to have a federal preemption so that athletes can benefit from their name, image, and likeness. States have already started doing this. The NCAA has been a defunct association that hasn't kept up with the times. And so I think Charlie, between his private sector experience, what he's proven, to do in the public sector, plus, he's a college athlete, which that is a departure from, what the association president has been in the past. So I think he's going to be great at the job. And given my experience working with them, I look forward to working with him on these solutions.
You mentioned one of the things that, allowing athletes to make some money off their name and image because everybody else is making money. Is there something else there that needs to be done? Is there the steps that they haven't gone far enough with in your mind that you're hopeful Charlie Baker does?
Well, look, there's a lot of gender equity issues that are plaguing the whole ecosystem of college sports. I often say that the growth in college sports from a fan perspective as well as a revenue perspective is in women's sports. When I was a young woman, I would have died to watch a women's basketball game or a women's volleyball game, but there was not even the opportunity. My 12-year-old daughter, Grace, she seeks it out. That's her preference. She would rather watch UConn play South Carolina. And the fact that it's not promoted in the same way, it shows you that the reason why we haven't hit the numbers is because, these TV deals are favored more toward men's sports than women. And so I think, Charlie, and we had a long conversation after the announcement, but the NCAA and college sports as a whole, it needs to kind of enter a new disruptive phase. They have to start, maybe breaking some things or some norms that they have in their head around how how college sports gets financed and who's watching. Because I do think that they're missing an opportunity and leaving lots of money on the table when it comes to women in sports.
I get the feeling that at some point during his tenure as NCAA president, he's going to have to deal with the transgender athletes in women's sports. We're starting to hear female athletes start to say, hey, listen, we worked for 50 years through Title IX to try to get a level playing field. As you said, they're not there yet financially, but now we're kind of fighting something from within. Is that an issue that has to be addressed? As a female who played college athletics, is that something that needs to be addressed to allow the women's games to progress?
Of course, it has to be addressed. I think the worry is that sometimes the rhetoric sets in before, folks are actually accurately diagnosing a situation, right? I mean, the first and foremost, we are not far enough along in the LGBTQ movement to start like putting all these, sort of opinions or guardrails or just thwarting the ability to sort of live freely and equally in our society. So we have to make sure that we're giving every opportunity to our transgender, sisters and brothers. But absolutely in sports, we have to take a thoughtful approach. And look, this is where Charlie does a good job, right? I mean, he meets with stakeholders. He understands the totality of a discussion before, moving on it. And I think that's what this requires. We can't just let, the fear set in and that rhetoric to set in before we come up with thoughtful solutions around how how that's going to look. And so, yeah, I think there's transgender players in sports. There's gender equity. There's collective bargaining. I mean, there was just a major, lawsuit or the National Labor Relations Board, just issued a decision around, USC and not just the university, which has been done in the past, but also the league and the NCAA around how we're going to classify athletes as, people who generate all this value for college athletics. And so, Charlie's no question, he's coming into some very thorny issues. But I think even the more reason to have someone level-headed at the helm.
All right. I know you have to run in a moment, but I wanted to quickly ask you about Elon Musk, Twitter, social media, digital. You've been very vocal, as have many people in your party, about Elon Musk's stewardship of Twitter. Some folks are saying, well, welcome to the party. We've been complaining about Twitter censorship and other things for forever. What should social media be, and what role should government play, if any, in its regulation?
So I think first and foremost, in the tack that we've taken, there's a lot of places I think where government can play a role. There's obviously an antitrust role. And we've seen this. We were so close to getting some legislation passed this year so that, online retail sites that, sell small business items as well as, their own items didn't use their algorithms to promote their own items over, the small business retailers. That's real and that happens. And so I do think that there's an antitrust component. I'm supportive of that, but I haven't really spent my time and energy. That's Judiciary Committee, and I'm Energy and Commerce. I want simple things. I want transparency. My problem with Mr. Musk and the Twitter platform is that they've actually historically been pretty good about letting independent researchers be the watchdogs of that platform, right? So injecting a little transparency so that we can understand, how content gets shown to a certain group of people, how it impacts a certain group of people. When you take that away, it is completely opaque. I mean, if there's anything that we learned from Frances Haugen, the whistleblower, from the Facebook hearings, it's that first and foremost, if we are going to embark on responsible policymaking, we need transparency. We need, platforms to be upfront about the risks that they are trying to mitigate. What harms are potentially at, risk for their users. Those are the types of conversations that we need so that we do have a place that defaults toward safety. And I look at this through the lens of a mom. I've got 8 and 12-year-old daughters. I see how addictive those platforms can be. And I also know it doesn't take a scientist to figure out that can really erode a young person's mental health. It's them staying on them seeing the wrong things, them being targeted the wrong advertisements. And so first and foremost, I think that there's a whole host of transparency legislation we can pass so that we understand the magnitude of the problem and then we can help regulate.
All right. Lots to unfurl there. We'll save that for your next visit. Are you going to come back?
Absolutely.
All right. Awesome. Congresswoman Lori Trahan, thank you very much. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to you and all your loved ones. And I hope you have enough time to get all your Christmas shopping done. If you get it done early, if I give you a few bucks, can you do some for me too while you're out there?
I wish I could say yes, Teddy, but that is out of the question.
All right. Well, I'll do it by
Merry
myself.
Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Inside View with Teddy Panos. I've got a lot of stuff coming up. If you're watching this on Tuesday, the day we posted this, got a live show with John Leahy, Lowell City Councilor, former Mayor John Leahy, Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. And then our annual Festivus show starts on 10 a.m. Friday, the 23rd. You don't want to miss that. Till then, everybody, stay safe and have yourself a wonderful day.